That's better. Been fighting with my camera a little to have enough time to do this video. So, here today in my closet, coat closet, cloakroom, whatever you want to call it, to do a video about John Wayne Gacy. Lots and lots of documentaries on right now about this guy. I encourage you to watch them with caution. His crimes were very graphic, and they were against children and boys in their 20s. So it's very, very disturbing for those of us who have kids in that age range. It's very distressing because, they're definitely at risk with individuals like this. So John Wayne Gacy, his dad was an alcoholic who was very violent. He really wanted his dad's approval. He eventually did get his dad's approval when he got married in his 20s. And his father-in-law was involved with KFC and, really got him involved with running a franchise and things like this. So at that point, his dad, kind of congratulated him, and he had his dad's approval. Interesting fact, his dad actually drank in the basement, which is later tied into Gacy's crimes because Gacy put the bodies of his victims in the crawl space under his house. Now, he could only fit 28 victims of his 33, so 5 of his victims were actually found in a nearby river, and he did tell law enforcement that that's where they would find some of them, and he was a little bit mysterious about, telling them, but they did figure it out and find the bodies of those victims. There are some thoughts that there may be more victims, bodies out there, but to date, it is 33 victims of this gentleman. Now, let's talk about how maybe things could have been prevented. So when he was 26, Gacy was actually convicted of sodomy. And he was married at the time with kids. So they were sort of his cover story. He did tell interviewers that he really liked that life, but apparently he didn't like it enough to do the right thing because he did have a sexual relationship with an underage boy. He happened to be the son of someone who was prominent in the community. He went home and told his father, and they, of course, went after Gacy, like we would too, right? So he ended up being convicted and sentenced to 10 years. For the crime of sodomy with this underage boy. But he got out in about a year because of good behavior. So this is a serious issue that we have even today in our prison system. For whatever reason, people are, doing these crimes, which I would consider violent and life-altering for their victims. And even if they're sentenced to something that might be a reasonable amount of time for their crime, they get out early. And that's exactly what happened with Gacy. He got out early, and over the next 10 years after he was released, he killed 33 young men and hid their bodies. And these young men, a lot of them were, transient. They were runaways. Some of them were homosexuals who he picked up in gay bars, which, at the time, being gay was very in the closet. And so, this is a very vulnerable population. And I would suggest that we still have vulnerable populations like this. We are a little bit better about talking about our differences these days, but the way we treat people who are different, we still treat them with a great disrespect and lack of caring. So these boys that went missing, that Gacy took and killed, it was a long time before people realized they were missing. And there was not a lot of effort by law enforcement to find them. You should know that back in those days, there was the proverbial wait, the wait and see thought, where young people, if they went missing in their teenage years, parents were told to give it 72 hours and then maybe 48 hours. We now have Amber Alerts because that was overturned. A lot of times, if you wait to find missing children or teenagers or young people, by the time you find them, the crime has already been committed and they've already been killed. So it's very important to get right out there and start looking for them and start banging doors down and asking people questions and really trying to retrace their steps. So with my kids, and I know I'm a colossal pain in their butts, but I make them text me and let me know where they're at. And I always tell them, if something happens, I need to know where to start looking. I need to know where you've been so that I can ask people and I can come find you if someone takes you. And I think this is really important. You don't want to scare your kids, but it's just good, responsible parenting to keep track of your kids and know where they are at all times. And I do the same thing in return. I let my family know where I am. Even if I'm just doing an unplanned Walmart shopping stop, I let them know, hey, I'm at Walmart, going to be here for a few minutes, and then I'll be home. Because you just never know. You know, it's those times when I don't check in that maybe something could happen. So please be safe and please do that. Keep track of each other. Okay, so Gacy gets out of prison. He moves to a different state. The sex offender list was, in fact, functioning, but they did not communicate very well between states, and they did not communicate very well between departments. Again, just like the Amber Alert, some of those things have been rectified. We now understand that sex offenders don't like to check in. They're on the list for a reason. They don't want anyone to know they're on the list. Moving away and not checking in, law enforcement tells me now, is, you know, something that is frequently a challenge in keeping track of these individuals. So he does eventually pick the wrong kid. He chooses a kid that the community really cares about, and this leads to his arrest and conviction. He is sentenced to death, and he did receive the death penalty in the 90s. And prior to being killed by lethal injection, he did many appeals, as many as he was allowed, with the reasoning that he was convicted because of ineffective legal counsel. Now, this is interesting because I'm currently working a case for an organization that my family's involved with. It's not a school. We are involved with a lot of schools. This is not a school. I'm not going to give you details. I will tell you that I'm involved because this organization is currently very divided. Many of our key families have left because we have a registered sex offender in a leadership role. Now, the feeling here is that he's not breaking any laws because it's not a school. A lot of the rules about sex offenders apply only to this school background, and it wouldn't apply to this organization. However, we do have kids involved with this organization that meet this gentleman's modus operandi, his MO. His MO was 15-year-old girls, 15 and 16-year-old girls. And basically what he would do is he would groom them and show them pornography, exchange pornography with them online so that eventually he could meet them and molest them. So there is some very serious concern here about this gentleman's involvement, and I understand both sides. So in looking into his public records, one thing that I discovered was that he was not convicted of felonious sexual assault. That's the typical charge that's placed against people in this day and age for that kind of behavior. There was only enough evidence for pornography and child exploitation related to pornography. Now, while that is enough to get a conviction, and he did, he was convicted and sentenced to 96 months. I was not able to find if he served all 96 months or if he got out early for good behavior like Gacy. Gacy only served 1 year of his 10-year sentence. It is like Gacy, he did file many appeals for, you guessed it, ineffective legal counsel. His appeals revolved around the idea that his lawyers didn't do their jobs, didn't inform him properly, didn't follow proper procedures, things like this. These appeals rarely win because they do not focus on the responsibility of the individual. They seek to get out of the charges with almost a loophole effect. And most judges really don't fall for that. These are serious crimes, and we need to make sure that individuals like this don't get off without, punishment that is proper and appropriate. So, having this individual involved in our organization is very risky. And my concerns are that many times with these offenders, what begins as a sexual assault can, like in Gacy's case, escalate to strangulation and then later to stabbing. And I don't want to be scary, but I do think that this individual is very capable of fooling people and being charismatic, just like Gacy was. So what can we do? Well, for starters, kids under 18 can never be alone with this gentleman. And I think that we need to be very watchful. I think anything that is suspicious behavior needs to be reported immediately to law enforcement. Law enforcement is aware he is registered as a sexual offender in our state. And so law enforcement is aware of the danger that he poses to the rest of society, but especially to the population and the demographic, where he has really had the most issue, and that would be 15 and 16-year-old girls. As an individual, I see both sides. As a professional, I would say, he really shouldn't be involved here. Now, the argument of the leadership is that people can change and that people, can learn from their mistakes and that they can be, dramatically different after they receive punishment for their crime. My concern is that these kinds of offenders typically don't change, and it has been found that the only way to make sure that recidivism or doing the crime again doesn't happen is the sex offender list. It is this idea that we are watchful. So as long as I'm involved in this organization, this individual is going to be watched. This individual is going to be watched very, very closely. And any of the interactions that I am aware of regarding our organization, again, no contact alone with children under 18. And definitely a warning to parents if I see a close connection between this gentleman and any of their children. His crimes were on the computer via the internet. And so that is an area where, I really can't be watchful, but the FBI certainly can be. And I do know for a fact that the FBI is watchful of these things, even in our local small rural community here in New Hampshire. I worked a case a few years back where a young girl criminally threatened to kill everyone in her school with a gun. And immediately the FBI came and took her away. So I do know that they are monitoring activities very closely online. And hopefully this means that if this gentleman does attempt to groom and meet up with young girls in the future, he will be caught. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's really important to look at the patterns of behaviors. We study cases like Gacy so that we can understand how it happened to make sure it doesn't happen again. I told my husband today, my goal with these videos and any books that I write in the future and any trainings that I give is to make sure that all of you have the same tools that I have. After 10 years of studying forensic psychology, I look for patterns, I identify patterns, and based on those patterns, I can sort of make predictions about what might happen. So at this point, I'm not alarmed because this gentleman is being watched very closely and we are aware of who he is. And I will continue to make leadership aware of who this gentleman is. And we just need to be very careful. The problem is you can't convict people until they actually commit the crime. And so vigilance